The Japs had dug pillboxes in, and as much as we had shelled and strafed and bombed the beach, most of what we had done was blown away the camouflage and the young trees that had grown with 2 years from the face of these pillboxes, which were, dug into the sand, and they had coconut logs and sand on top and trees growing on the top. New Guinea had been raised up out of the ocean at an angle. So the softer rock got washed away, and there was all kinds of little valleys and caves, The engineers were funny guys. They were all armed. The boat that I saw had the new carbine, a 15-round carbine. But they had all kinds. They had 3 or 4 different kinds of grenades. They had satchel charges. My gun was up a little higher than the number 1 gun. So the engineer, captain I think he was, said, "Bring your gun down to the mouth of the cave, and I'll have my men standing by. And every opening that you see, fire a couple of rounds in, facing into the interior of the cave." So everybody, all the engineers were scurrying around and putting satchel charges. And then somebody hollered, "Fire in a hole," and everybody pulled they had pull fuses on some of these. And they all ran to get out of the cave. But the explosion took a lot of the rock, and my gun I was covered by the rock. It's a good thing I had been behind the gun, and the gun itself and the tripod protected me from the rock that had fallen down.
You were basically buried.
Yes, although I think my legs were sticking out, I'm not sure. Then Geissner Rifle Company came in, and they were going to cover the opening in case Japs come out. And the engineers pulled the rocks off me. It was a very scary experience. I ran the whole belt of ammunition out because I figured there wouldn't be any engineers in front. A lot of what I did was instinctive. There were no big battles in New Guinea, none.
It was all skirmishing?
All skirmishing and killing each other in small groups. And I remember, I started telling you about the 2 tanks. Well, what Colonel Roosevelt did is he made them ride back and forth across the top of the pillboxes until they collapsed. Yeah, and I remember hearing the Jap grenades going off when the tops began going down. They killed themselves with grenades. You see, we didn't really know how many Japs there were there. We didn't know from the photographs, which you've seen, how many of the men that had fought in China were still alive or shipped down. So we just kept looking for Japs. And the only way we could find them was go out on patrol. We set up ambushes, and no Japs ever came. Or we go and we're on our way to set up an ambush, and the Japs would ambush us. Meanwhile, we were killing them. And that was the bottom line. Every night, there was a Japanese plane that was going to ruin our sleep. I think the Japanese did it deliberately. Washing Machine Charlie was an old bomber. I think it was a Betty, a 2-engine that was like too beat up to be used in a regular bomb run. And it would come over, and they were out of sync. One of the guys said it sounded like a washing machine. At that time, I only had a pistol because we were, the machine gun was dug in, and we were guarding the airfield. But since we had a large squad, I think 7 or 8 guys, they could take care of the machine gun. and I could go on patrol, because what happened, they were issuing to the officers, were being issued these new carbines with a 15-round clip, and he got blown up by one of their 90mm mortar shells, and the stock of the carbine, where there's a hole in it for the oiler and sling, was broken off there. So what I did is I cut off the stock at the pistol grip. I burned a hole in it with a Japanese cleaning rod, and I hung it around my neck. And what happened was, on this particular patrol, we were ambushed, and they threw some grenades in. We were actually on a real trail. It wasn't a trail, was only about this wide. But the part I was on, there was bamboo about an inch around. And I made the mistake of trying to dive into the bushes. Instead, I dived onto the bamboo, which was very flexible, and threw me back on the trail, because I figured I'd roll over. And besides my pistol, I had this little carbine. But I was rolled back on the trail. And this guy was holding this sword in two hands and charging at me and screaming. But I had this carbine, so I loosened the safety, and I shot him on the chest and face. And he fell over backwards. And I saw he had a map case, and he had this thing hanging on his belt. They had a snap on his belt. But I took his whole map case, and I took the sword. In fact, I took the belt too. But his belt had a buckle. I think this is a guy. This is the guy that tried to kill me with the sword. I think I still sound indignant because he had a pistol. See, Lou Ayres had a connection at the post office. The post office tent was right next to his. And there was lots of cardboard around from the supply tent. I would always wrap everything up and give him money, and he would send it home to my father, who stuck it in a barrel in the basement. I had a tough time accepting the Japanese willingness to die. I had a terrible time with that, because I wanted to live. And I was moving the machine gun, and I had my Tommy gun without the stock stuck in my webbing, because I didn't have a pistol. So I didn't want to be without a personal weapon. So what happened was that I was moving the machine gun, and this Jap all of a sudden gets up from a pile of bodies with this bayonet and flag, and he's screaming and he's charging at me. So I, yanked out my Tommy gun, and I gave him I think I gave him a 5-round burst because I was nervous.
That's you standing over the guy.
Yeah, he fell down right near me. And this is where I carried my Tommy gun whenever I had to move the machine gun and couldn't use it.
So here it is. This is the pistol grip, and this is the receiver, and it's stuck underneath your suspenders.
Yeah.
And there's the .30 caliber water cooled, and there's the flag.
Yeah. And I was kind of shaken up, but at that time, in fact, I still have the knife. It wasn't this knife, it was a short Australian machete.
Oh, I saw that at your place. Yeah. You replaced the
I replaced the handle. And
Yeah.
I was able to cut the jacket off and turn them over. We weren't warned about these nuts. We were with an Australian patrol, and where I killed the two medics that had ambushed us. When we got to the hospital, there was I think it was a 12-bed unit. These were beds made out of sticks, and there were thin cotton blankets, and there were wounded men or sick men laying in them. And we didn't have a medic anymore at that time. We hadn't gotten a new one. So I was going to go down and see, you know, actually I was going to go down and see if I could find some quinine, see? But the Australian says no. He says some of these guys may have hand grenades under the blankets with them. So I said, what are we going to do with them? He said, I'm going to kill him. And he was carrying a Bren gun. Bren gun had a clip on the top.
It's a light machine gun.
Light machine gun. And he just ran it down all the rows. And he says, come on, let's look. So we looked. In fact, I took one of the clean blankets and used it for a while. And he showed me. They had grenades with the pins out. Hennessy was in my squad. He was an ammo bearer. He was a buck private, and he wasn't a troublemaker, but he was a goof-off. And he was one of the first guys in my squad that was issued a carbine, because he said he couldn't hit shit with a pistol. I didn't argue with him, because as far as I was concerned, he was a good gunner. He never jammed the gun, and he always fired short bursts. The thing I remember most about him was when he was learning how to familiarize himself with the carbine. He pushed the magazine release button instead of the safety, and the clip fell out. So he bent down in the foxhole to pick up the clip, and a Jap light machine gun had zeroed in on him, fired a short burst right over his head, hit the back of the machine gun emplacement. And one of the riflemen spotted him and killed him, the Jap light machine gunner. Bob Hope was supposed to come with Marilyn Maxwell to Bayak, and it was going to be a real big thing. And we were all set, you know, to go and show. We'd even been issued new fatigues. And what happened was that there was a little island called Sapori, right next to Bayak Island. And the Japs had freight submarines, they were called, that they used to deliver stuff so our Navy couldn't get them, you know, to these outposts in Guinea. And what happened is they delivered a unit of Marines with mortars and with light machine guns. I think we had 4 landing craft full of Americans. And we landed and we dug in the gun. But the Japs had been there for a couple of days already before the natives told us that there were Japs there. One of the big 90mm shells landed in the machine gun emplacement, knocked up the machine gun, it hit me in the face, cracked my palate in 2 places and broke some teeth. And some of the metal hit me in the back and on the arm. And the tore open my number 2 gunner, who absorbed most of the fragments, and his intestines were blown all over me. I was blown against the side of the emplacement, unconscious. My nose was bleeding, my ear was bleeding, this ear. I got a big hunk of coral in my right eye, made a red spot, but I didn't know how bad it was. In any event, I was out. At that time, the company had to move forward, and there were more boats with reinforcements landing. So they kept moving. They eventually killed all the Marines on that particular piece of land. It wasn't a big island, maybe as big as a city block. That's all. And so I was laying there, and it rained during the night. So I got a little moisture. And in the morning, Graves Registration came to take care of our dead and the Jap dead and salvage any of the equipment they could. And I was already moving. So they figured I'm not dead yet. And since all the number 2 gunners and Tessons had died, they didn't know which was his, which was mine. So they made a temporary litter, poncho and a couple of poles, and they took me down to the landing craft, which took me to the field hospital. I didn't go to an aid station. And they picked me up and carried me and lined me up with the other litters with wounded outside the hospital tent. They carried you inside to work on you. So I'm laying there, and luckily it's raining again. I got a little moisture. And they had a doctor doing something called triage. And he got to me, and he had a stick or something, and he began poking at the intestines, and he saw they weren't mine. It stuck to me and dried. And I was moving. So we had a couple of badly wounded guys to take care of first. And I didn't hear him say it, but I know that I was supposed to go in soon. And they carried me in, litter and all, and they slid me onto the table that they were using. And they had 2 of the ward boys scrape me off. When I came to, I was on a litter, on a couple of coconut logs, and my face was wired up. Yeah, it seems that they had done some surgery on my mouth, but I don't know what. And I think they did something with my ear, but I'm not sure. But I was in what they called a terminal ward. You know, that's where you're supposed to be there within 2 weeks. They transfer you or they bury you. Well, after the first 2 weeks, I began to, feel a little better. And I began to notice that every morning the ward boys would come by and they'd kick the handle of the litter and they'd see the way the body moved in it. And if they looked dead, they would step over the log and put a mirror against his mouth. If they thought he was dead, they would unclip the clipboard and put it on his chest. And then when the doctor came through, he would check. They had to have a doctor sign the piece of paper. And when I began to realize that, this was by the 3rd week, I began getting up on my elbow as much as I could. And when the ward boy came along saying, "Don't kick my litter," And I didn't look like much because I think I was still suffering from, I know I was suffering from the dysentery because I kept shitting in the litter. But they kept feeding me some kind of liquid. And I had a IV. And I think the IV is what saved me. There was something in it because I kept feeling better and better. This was the Purple Heart. This is the Combat Infantry Award. I think I got $10 a month more because of that. This is the Bronze Star that Colonel Roosevelt put me in for. I don't know exactly what for. There's a couple of area ribbons, and these little stars on this means I made 4 landings. In Deshan General Hospital, you couldn't go out on pass unless you were wearing all your ribbons. This is the 41st Division insignia. That's the shoulder patch of the 41st. It's a long time ago. And you know what's interesting? I know that we got unit citations and we got decorations from the Dutch government. Of course, we fought in the Netherlands, East Indies. But they're meaningless today. My whole feeling about my little part in the war was that it was something I had to do, and I paid for it. I'm still paying for it. The occasional battle dreams I get, and now they can't repair this eye because it got of the damage to the socket. I mean, you know, but I had to do it. What kind of a life would I have had if I didn't? You know?
Do you feel it was worth it?
Oh, yes.